You're live, Mayor.
All right, thanks. Thanks everybody for getting together. I think we've just got two issues that I want to talk about. The main one, which was on the agenda, which is to make some decisions about where we want to head with respect to short-term rental guidelines. And the second is I do want to take this opportunity to bring you up to speed on where we are with the COVID antibody testing at the West Beach Conference Center next week. We've got some questions as expected. We soon got a number of calls about people who want to know whether they also could be included or why can't they be included, and so we have a few decisions to make and limited ability to add additional people. But after we deal with the rental guidelines, we can go to that issue. You should have in front of you a draft set of a resolution, but the thing that's most important in that is the actual guidelines. A quick little summary of where we have been on this issue and how we got to this point, and since both Chris and Stephanie have been a part of that, I'd ask them to jump in at any point. But I think everybody realizes that that with the focus in trying to get not just on Kiowa but elsewhere, move businesses back toward, get the economy going, move businesses back towards being in a position where they can now start making decisions about how to start up their businesses. The focus has been to turning that responsibility over to businesses, but in most cases, having them operate under various kinds of guidelines. So, whether it be the dining facilities that are operating under guidelines which the Restaurant Association created, but which the governor has endorsed and directed as part of his opening of dining, whether it be most recently when the decisions were made to allow close contact businesses to start to reopen, and there are guidelines in place for whether it be for opening pools or hair salons or whatever. We had the same issue we needed to address with short-term rentals. And in the case of short-term rentals, we did not have an obvious set of external guidelines that were being provided by the state or elsewhere. So starting a couple weeks ago, we have had a number of conversations with different groups. We've met a couple times with several of the larger rental management companies. We've also had conversations that involved MUSC in these discussions. I think in addition, we've looked at what other entities are doing. I think whether you have it or not, for example, yesterday the IOP Town Council approved, and they did it not by guidelines, but they approved an ordinance that actually delineated in fairly significant detail a number of guidelines, both for short-term rentals and for hotels. We know Airbnb has put out guidelines for their properties, and so we not only is this the direction that most or that a number of large tourism communities have headed, but there are a number of things we had to look at as models to think about this. I do think in what we need to accomplish here is to decide whether we are in fact and do want to establish a set of guidelines that would be communicated to our short-term rentals. I stress, and we will have the discussion, and we can go in different directions, but I would stress that it's intentional the way I've described that, which is guidelines. I'm not recommending that we establish a ordinance that we are dictating specific requirements that must be met, but we are approaching this more like these other businesses like dining and so on. I would argue and certainly suggest that we do need to put some guidelines in place. I think we have to recognize that of all of the businesses on the island, particularly tourism related, in the aggregate, our short-term rental business is the largest in terms of the number of people that it attracts, the number of people that are affected by our short-term rentals. It's certainly beyond our restaurants, it's beyond the club, it's beyond the hotel. And I think the other argument for establishing guidelines is twofold. One, we have 1,350 individual property owners who own and rent out their properties for some part of the time on this island, and the manner in which they approach managing those properties ranges all over the board. And so, we have a lot of them who operate through some of the large companies like The Resort or Pam Harrington or Acres Alice or Sweetgrass or Vacasa, who have the resources and the ability to ensure that they are putting in place, I think, the kinds of sanitation and cleaning and other kinds of guidelines that are being suggested. And then we have lots and lots of people who are renting out their properties often on their own through VVRO. In many cases, they are. I've talked to a lot of them. In many cases, they are equally sophisticated in what they are doing. They're on their own, evaluating protocols and putting things in place. And there are others where I think it's not as clear that they have a handle on what they should be doing or have available to them the resources to make sure that they're putting the kinds of operating requirements in place for the rentals that they should. So what we have done over the last week, and this has been primarily Chris and Stephanie working with MUSC and with getting advice from, or at least getting input from some of the major rental companies, a overall set of guidelines. You have that document. They are very general. They are very high level. They give, I think they are intended more to try to highlight to rental owners and property managers the areas in which they need to be focusing and what some of the preferred or suggested practices are. They are not prescriptive. They provide an overview and some direction, but they still leave, I think, options for rentals in terms of how they operate within that. And they focus primarily upon the issue of cleaning and ensuring that rental properties are cleaned in a proper manner, reflective of the specific needs of the COVID virus, that they focus on transparency and work to make sure that renters understand the manner in which their properties have been cleaned. And they also focus on the question of what are the responsibilities of renters and what kind of process needs to be in place if renters, while they are here, believe or become infected by the virus. What is their what is expected of them in order to deal with that issue? So you have the document in front of you, and it's really a two-part. The first part are the specific high-level guidelines, and then by reference, MUSC, there's a appendix here, which is really a additional detail that would allow someone, if they are looking at, for example, the guideline that says that you as an example, ensure that the short-term rental property is cleaned prior to rental by following at minimum recommended MUSC guidelines. The attachment is what those recommended MUSC guidelines are. So I'm going to ask Stephanie and Chris if they have anything to add or correct in any of my comments. I think the goal here is to determine two things. Three things. Do we believe it's important to establish guidelines for our short-term rentals during this period of time? Are we comfortable with these guidelines? And there is kind of a minor technical issue, which is, do we want to do this in the form of a resolution, which is the way that it's written, or do we simply want to basically conclude as a council that we are comfortable with these guidelines, we want to promulgate them, communicate them to our rentals, but not go through the process of adopting them as a formal resolution. Chris and Stephanie, anything to add or a different take?
Yeah, let me take your last comment first, which is
Chris, I can just barely hear you.
Hang on, let me get my volume up. That better?
Yep.
Okay.
To me it is. I don't know about the others.
Your last comment in terms of whether we want to put this into an ordinance or a resolution. The 6 bullet points that we have listed on the guideline sheet, not the MUSC sheet, but the other, that was really developed over a course of several meetings with the property manager, the 6 primary or major property managers on the island. I think there is a unanimous support for 5 of those 6 bullet points. I think there is primary support for the 6th one being the 24-hour wait between guests. I think that where there is the possibility of doing that on future rentals, there's general support for it, not unanimous. Where there isn't the ability to either have a 24-hour waiting period, there is unanimous support for trying to do the enhanced cleaning and at least the hour and a half type of gap before you send the cleaning crew in. I think if we can do this on a voluntary basis with responsible players, I would prefer to go that route. I think it's more cooperative and more likely to get widespread support on it, rather than using a club to force people to do what they should be doing in the first place and what they want to be doing. So to answer that question, I would prefer to do guidelines.
And Chris, if I could only add one thing, because the draft in front of you has a softened version of the 24-hour wait from the version that you probably had yesterday. And that is a result of, frankly, some feedback and some conversations back and forth with MUSC. And basically what it is saying, the advice is essentially that the best practice is that if a property stays vacant for 24 hours, that a significant amount of the virus denigrates on its own. That's much safer than for cleaning crews when they come in after that period to clean. You're not putting them in as much potential safety concern. Your renter, you also then are trying to clean a property that has already got less of the virus. So it's a best practice. I think that there are also the issues with that because it sometimes gets in the way of a 7-day rental or whatever. So the way it's postured is really that where an entity is dealing appropriately and reliably with the cleaning protocol that are laid out, then it's indicating it's a best practice, but it's not indicating that is, again, these aren't required. It's not indicating that is something that we're suggesting has to be done. What we are saying though is where you have a rental property that is not in a position to ensure that the cleaning people that they have are able to carry out that level of protocol, or are not sure they reliably are doing it. Then what we're basically saying is if you're unsure that you can do the cleanings correctly, then you should be using the 24-hour gap in between. So we've softened that a little bit to make it more clear that it's being recommended in a more particular situation.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what we did. That was last night's revision. Interestingly, I believe it's Airbnb has given guidance to all of their property owners who rent their properties to either give a 24-hour window between rentals with a thorough cleaning. So they actually take a stiffer line on it. Their ability to enforce it's a question, but that's certainly their stronger recommendation.
Yeah, some are doing that. I mentioned to a couple of you offline that I've got a rental up in North Carolina, and they wrote me a letter, an email last night that indicated that the the protocol that they were putting in place for all rentals was a 24-hour wait in between. But having said that, we have gone the direction of saying we wanted to rely heavily on MUSC for their recommendation, and they are comfortable that in the fashion that we've described as here, that they think that that's a satisfactory, it's an adequate process to have the 24-hour gap where you cannot ensure that you have good cleaning. But if you're doing it, then it's not a required.
And I support that. I'm comfortable with that.
And I do too. Stephanie, you have any additional input or insight into these and the discussions we had?
No, I think you guys both covered it well.
Let me open it up to discussion from the whole group. You've seen these just in general, in terms of the need and desire to move forward, and the guidelines specifically.
I'll comment. This is Dan. I like the fact that it's in the form of a resolution, but it's a resolution of guidelines that says we're very interested in people carrying it out. And I think you're right. I think we have very responsible owners in general. And I think 99% of them will follow these guidelines or do their best in trying to follow it. And I think that's the right direction. So I'm in support of where we are on this resolution as a guideline. Yeah.
Marianne?
I support the resolution as guidelines, and I think it's really important though, because it does say it's during COVID-19. And I think if I were renting, I would want to know that if I were the renter, I would want to know that the place I'm renting has met some standards for cleanliness. I think it would make me more comfortable in going there. So to have this resolution as guidelines for our renters, I think, our property owners, I think is necessary.
Klaus, any thoughts?
No, I agree with Dan and Marianne completely.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to this too is from a Kiowa reputational standpoint. I can't talk today. I mean, you know, I don't have huge doubts, as I said, that our major rental companies on their own are headed. I mean, they were headed this way and probably going above and beyond this, regardless of the guidelines that we've created here. I also think that an awful lot of our individual renters are in the exact same place. So, but from a reputational standpoint, I think it also makes sense to be able outwardly to be telling the people who are considering coming here that when you come to Kiowa, this, you know, there is a level, you can expect a certain level of expectation of how we're going to operate, and there's transparency that renters can say, okay, when I come here, what should I expect? And if anything, I would hope that it actually is seen as a positive outward to people who are considering to rent, because they're going to look around and say, well, what communities appear to be doing things to keep them safe, and having these guidelines, I think, will help that. And when you have other communities like IOP and others who are establishing those requirements, I'm not sure if we don't have them what that potentially says about our own seriousness about how this is handled. So I think
that's a very good point.
Joe, from a legal standpoint, the difference between us just agreeing and promulgating these as guidelines or actually voting and approving them as a resolution, is that a difference without meaning? Or Joe, we can't hear you. Joe, you're off.
I think, yeah, Joe, we can't hear you. But
Craig,
to
as
answer
he tries to get his technical issue solved, I have a question. I know you've had the most conversations with MUSC. I know you've had conversations and meetings with them today. Have they indicated whether any of the 6 major property owners, property managers are going to be going through the back to business certification on the rental side of the business? I know several are doing it on other aspects, but of the 6 major property managers.
The last, I don't know for certain. The last communication I saw looked like a couple of them were, and a couple of them, it didn't appear that they had said no. It just didn't appear that they had responded yet. But I thought a couple of them were interested in working with MUSC directly. But I don't know that but I don't think all 6 now.
And the ones that do, they would actually be following the guidelines that are on the separate or second page or the separate resolution that is from MUSC. Is that correct?
That's the intent of that, yes. Now, having said that, just because somebody doesn't go forward with working directly with MUSC on this next back to business level that MUSC has, where they actually come in and look at their protocols, their offices, how they're handling their clients and so on. I don't think that means that independently that they aren't going to be actually using this. I think some of them probably want to and will be following the MUSC guidelines. They just may not be going further in taking any additional services from MUSC. But I don't know. I don't know where that stands.
And if I can add, Chris, out of the 6, 3 had submitted their protocols to MUSC. They submitted them to me, and then I forward them on. Then MUSC, Dr. O'Brien did respond, I believe last night, and said that they did review their the 3 different agency protocols, and they looked fine in terms of the guidelines that MUSC would put out. So they did review those, and they seem pleased with what they're proposing to put in place.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
And the 6 for the rest of this, the 6 that were working in discussions with MUSC and have assisted us in this were, of course, the Keel Island Resort, Pam Harrington Exclusives, Acres Ellis, Vacasa, Sweetgrass, and ES. Stephanie, I always get ES, their initials in the wrong order.
ESPM.
ESPM. Those 6 are the entities that have been working on this. Joe, do we have your volume back on?
Barely.
Barely.
You would recommend a resolution is what I heard.
Yes.
And for a particular reason?
Well, I just don't even know what the alternative would be.
I think the alternative is, I mean, you get to the same place, really. I mean, the alternative is really no different than, we'll take dining when the governor took off the restrictions on indoor-outdoor dining. He in turn then referenced and adopted by reference, the Restaurant Association's guidelines with respect to dining. And so I think we were thinking we could do it either way. We could simply adopt these and communicate them as guidelines that the town has adopted and communicated and recommend, or we can do the resolution. I don't know that anybody on the town council has a strong.
Yeah, the only thing for me is Airbnb has some pretty stringent cleaning requirements now. And if a company like that is going out and doing that, I think it's very important for Kiowa to make sure we have some requirements for our short-term rentals. We're not going to be out there checking to see if everyone is enforcing it, but I think it is important to have some representation.
But these, even as a resolution, these are guidelines. They are guidelines.
Right. That's fine.
Any other, well, with that as the recommendation, then Stephanie, we would need a motion to adopt resolution number 20-02.
Yes.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
Second,
Do we have any additional discussion?
no.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And one of the things that we'll work closely with Stephanie Braswell on is trying to communicate as quickly and as best we can. We'll get this out on our website. We'll communicate it as best we can to rental owners and so forth.
Okay.
I did want to bring you up to date on the testing. So MUSC is right now. I was over there a little while ago. They brought in all their equipment today, getting completely set up so that they can begin this trial of COVID antibody testing. This is, as I think we tried to indicate in the communication yesterday, this is a trial. We really this is both something that we want to do here in the community. We think it will be important for us to have this information, but it is also a capability that MUSC is trying to get geared up to be able to do on a larger scale. So we are their first large scale attempt to do this. And so the nuts and bolts of it is that it will be at the West Beach Conference Center. It will be over 3 days. They will operate from 8 in the morning till 5 at night. It is obviously completely voluntary. It does require the person to pay for it via their insurance, but and there's a particular act that was passed as part of this pandemic. Under that act, it is MUSC's view that this is in fact picked up completely by insurance. It is a blood draw. There are several different approaches to this. This is probably the more difficult one that takes more time, but it is the one though that at the moment is known to have the highest level of reliability. However, down the road, there are others, and I've talked to people, other methods coming out that look also to have high levels of reliability that may be options in the future. The issue, of course, has risen is that we approached this with the idea that what we wanted to do was focus it on our full-time Kiowa residents. And the reason for that was not because we were trying to provide a benefit or perk to some people and not to others, but from a public health standpoint, what we were trying to basically understand, and this is when you hear people talking about the need in the future for communities to be doing more testing, part of that is so that they can be understanding from a community perspective what the level of potential immunity is in the community with that virus, which helps you understand, and again, there are a lot of issues about how much immunity you really have and how long it lasts, but it gives you some indication of the extent to which your community in an aggregate sense may be more or less exposed or more or less vulnerable to future outbreaks and so on. And so that was the intent. In the 3 days, MUSC has the ability to do about 1,200 tests, maybe 1,350 at the most, but probably about 1,200. So we're limited by the number that can be done. We have on paper about, best guess, between 1,500 and 1,600 full-time residents. So if we only focus on full-time residents, we still won't get all of them, but the presumption is all of them are not going to show up. I mean, we presume in this that some number of that 1,500 are not on the island, they're off somewhere else.
No, but Craig, sorry, just to butt in, no, we don't have all the residents here, but a lot of residents have family here.
Well, but and as we're talking about doing this, that's why I'm saying we're talking about doing this for residents, not for. I'll get to what happens if we were to try to do all these other groups. So the thought was if we could do our full-time residents. If we got 1,500, there's enough capability because the presumption is that all 1,500 aren't going to go, and we have capacity for about 1,200. And their experiences, some people just don't want to get their blood taken. Some people aren't here. Some people, it's just not what they're going to do. So even at 1,200, we can't get everybody. As I, certainly expected, we very quickly have heard well, why are we not doing this for part-time property owners? Why are we not doing it for Cacique? I've even got other communities up that are wanting to know why they're not involved. And the answer isn't because this is not a good thing that we wish that at some point could be provided, but that those groups don't fit in initially to the sample that we were trying to test for, and they don't fit within the 1,200 people. The problem with part-time owners is we don't have the foggiest idea how many are even on the island. We have no way of knowing, and if they have families here, we could have 2,000 to 3,000 more property owners and property owner families on this island. Which, if we just opened this up and said everybody come on day one, we would immediately just overload this thing. It would crater. What I would propose, and I have talked with MUSC again today, what we would propose is to do something like this, that we would devote Monday and Tuesday solely to our full-time residents. And by that, what we're talking about is people who, this is their primary residence. This is where they vote, where they're registered to vote or whatever, but essentially their primary residence. That we would go by alphabet, that Monday is probably A through L or something like that, and Tuesday is L through Z. And we would try to get all of our full-time residents in those first 2 days. Then what we would do on Tuesday is use that both as a day to pick up any more of the full-time residents that were not able to get there on Monday and Tuesday. And we would
You mean
also—
Wednesday, right?
I'm
You
sorry?
mean Wednesday?
On Wednesday, we would open it up to all of the full-time residents who didn't make it on Monday, Tuesday, or if we had too many and they were left standing, on Tuesday. In addition, we would, if we could, we would also at that point open the rest of the day up to non-resident property owners if they wanted to come and get tested, just recognizing that possibly we will have gotten through everybody else on day 1 and 2, and Wednesday could be all non full-time property owners. Or they could potentially get up there and find that, we can get a lot of them, but there could be some, I hate to say lines, because obviously there's a lot of work being done about social distancing and how people will be handled up there. But nonetheless, they could get up there and find that there's just more people than we have opportunities. That was why specifically in the communication we put out yesterday, we said that, we weren't done with this, that we were going to look at other opportunities, including MUSC and other providers that would allow us to pick up other groups on the island, whether it be part-time owners, whether it be eventually, I know that the resort and the club, and they'll be primarily responsible for this, will want to be able to do testing of their employees. So I think we were approaching this from the standpoint that we weren't done, but that in trying to at least carve out an initial group that served an important purpose for us, would be manageable for MUSC, that we could actually carve, we could describe it, that this was the way to go. If we simply said, we're going to be here 3 days and we're going to open it up to everybody, I don't know what's going to, I have no idea how we would manage that. I don't know whether we have 4,000 people, 3,000 people. I don't know. So what I would propose, and MUSC is comfortable with this, is let's try our best to see if on Wednesday we can in fact accommodate a good number of the part-time residents. And I know Kisik is interested, and I'm fine with that. They're not part of the town, but on the other hand, I would very comfortably argue that the full-time Kisik residents are as much interest to us as the full-time Kiowa, because they're on the island. They're at Freshfields. They're in the same grocery store. They're in the same restaurants. They're in the same club as many people. I think that having the full-time Kisik residents part of this makes great sense. But if we just open this up to everybody, MUSC is just not going to be able to handle it. So,
Well, Craig,
So-
sorry. I mean, it's not just opening it up also to non-resident property owners. I mean, are we proposing to check driver's licenses or other credentials? Because otherwise, I think there's a reasonable chance you're going to have, 275 people coming in from Seabrook.
it's on the conference center's on the wrong side of the gate, so we can handle that.
What
Okay,
about,
good point.
But aren't we going to check licenses or anything?
well, I would,
Well, if you want, I can run you through the whole process, but yeah, the way
I'm
this
just
works,
asking.
yeah, the way this will work is that, and we have the CERT team is going to assist. So, there basically is a process where the person, when they get there, they initially will be asked a couple questions about their just whether they currently have any symptoms whatsoever. Because if they do, they can't be tested. And so I think there's 2 questions that they get asked, which are essentially, are you currently having any of the symptoms of COVID-19, whatever? At which point, if they get through those 2 questions, then they go to a desk where they will give because the results have to be, of course, privately provided to them. The town will never have access to any individual's actual test result. This comes under all of the HIPAA requirements. So they will provide the credit card payment. They will provide their information to go onto the blood little vial that has their identification number. And that will have their address, because the results will have to be provided back to them. So they will provide their address and information so that they can have the results sent to them and they can be identified. So from the town standpoint, where we want to know the data for the full-time residents, we can get that even if part-time residents go, because MUSC will be able to carve out anybody who had a Kiowa address. The only thing that will be important that I talked with them about is if somebody comes in from Ohio, we need to make sure, and they are not a full-time resident here, they need to make sure that they give their Ohio resident address, not their Kiowa one. Otherwise, their results will get put into our in with the Kiowa results. So they'll have that data. We'll be able to carve out that the people were not full-time. Then they go to the blood draw station. Takes a couple minutes. It's just like when you go to the doctor's office and they take a blood test. It's a blood draw, and then they are out of there. But they can it is a significant process, which is why right now they believe they can do 400 a day, and that's with I think 6 stations operating at a time.
Greg, couple of comments. I think we should require driver's license identification, because otherwise you're going to have people who have residents here who come in and say, here's who I am, and here's my credit card, and here's my address on Kiowa, and they're not a full-time resident.
Right.
Will be overwhelmed on day 1. I would say at a minimum, day 1 and day 2, driver's license showing a Kiowa permanent resident.
And
And
And we
I
can do,
agree. For the record, I agree.
Yeah,
And we
I'd
can
also
do
rec-
we could do that.
Yeah.
But understand, and I realize that, of course, as soon as this is understood, I'm almost reluctant to say this, but I mean, we're just trying to get people tested, and
I know.
nobody is going to turn anybody away.
I'm with you.
It's dangerous for me to say that, and so it's going to really be important for people to in good faith, kind of go along with this the way we like to do it. And I think, obviously, if we get to the end of the 3 days and we find that there was a whole lot of unmet demand, MUSC and other providers that I've talked to in this island will be more than happy to try to turn around and get something set up. So this is not a one and done. This should not be seen as a one and done thing. I think everybody thinks that testing is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with in some fashion for a long time. So it really is our first attempt to work with MUSC to help them sort of get their procedures under their belt, by the same time benefiting the town, benefiting our residents. So look, I trust our residents, and I'm comfortable that if we tell them that we really want the residents on Monday, Tuesday, and yeah, we'll get a few who will show up, and that we really want to try to get, if we can, we'll do our best to leave some of Wednesday to pick up some non-resident property owners if there is still space left. I think that will work. And
Right,
Hey, Craig, sorry,
I
to push back, but I first of all, I think you're probably, you believe a little too much in, the goodness of
human
all your fellow men.
nature.
There will be a whole bunch of people who show up with all sorts of excuses, some being entirely legit. Hey, I can't make Wednesday, but I can make Monday. I think there'll be a lot of, I would also say the following, you are right, we should not be turning anyone away. You're quite right. However, we're not. I think I really cannot see the primary focus is the residents. I see no problem whatsoever with saying the first 2 days are reserved for residents, or maybe the first day and a half, and the last half day we can make a little flexible depending on how much we've seen. And in order to be tested in that first day and a half, you have to show a driver's license.
Right.
However, Wednesday is free and you can come then. I think if we don't do that, that whole notion of who comes when, it will just be a big muddle, and we will probably, have a lot of residents who don't then get tested.
well, and maybe I should have said earlier, I'm not the driver's license is not, I think that's part of the protocol, because when they show, it's just like when you go into the doctor's office and 90% of 100% of the cases, they want a picture of your driver's license and your insurance card, because they got to make sure the insurance matches. So they're gonna be looking.
But if someone shows up with an Ohio license,
Right.
are they going to send them? Are they going to politely say it's Wednesday? That's what should happen, I believe.
I don't think that's what we're going to end up doing.
I think the question really is, when do you look at the license? I mean, if you don't look at the license before they're up to the MUSC person, you have no way of knowing, are they taking up space in the line and they're not really eligible that day?
We're not, the MUSC people are up there to take blood.
That's all they're there for.
And not to be trying to enforce who we have going there and not going there.
I wasn't suggesting that. CERT could do that.
No, I know it. And I'm not going to ask our people are going to be fine. I'm not going to put our CERT team in the position of having them, trying to turn people away. I think they can ask the question, say, now, if you're not a non-resident, remember, I'm also, if you start checking, I'm not going to put the CERT team in a position of checking driver's licenses, because I got to worry about their health and their social distancing, and they are not in any way been trained or in a position to be directly interacting with our are people coming up there and looking at their driver's license and so on. So
That's
I think we just, I think we just got to trust it, explain our intent as best as we can, tell people as best we can that if we can accommodate non-resident owners on Wednesday, we'll do it. Because I would like to leave that open as an option. The worst thing that could happen, which I really would not want to have happen, is that we limit all of this only, we say we're only going to limit it to residents, and then we don't get a very good turnout from residents, and we have all this up here for 3 days, and we've had the capacity to take 1,200 tests, and we only take 800. I mean, that would be not a good thing. So
But then-
Greg, I think there's enough interest on the island on the part of residents that the danger, I think, is you're going to have 300 people lined up on Monday,
right.
including a lot of residents who are frustrated because they can't get a test done.
Mhm.
And the line is filled with people who are from Ohio and may or may not even be an owner. I'm concerned about it. I think you want a little bit more discipline in who goes. Otherwise, you're going to have people very frustrated and in line.
I mean, heck, let's, then stick a deputy out there to check driver's license before they ever get to MUSC.
I'm
Right.
not going to have our deputies at the same point doing contact work with this. I really do. I understand. I could be absolutely wrong. We may figure it out early on Monday. I guess what I'd like to do is at least this. Stephanie Braswell will work tomorrow with getting out the detailed communication how we want to do this, and I think I mean, I can tell you between the phone calls and emails that I get and that she gets and Stephanie gets, and I think we'll have a pretty good sense over the weekend of whether we have sort of resolved this issue in a manageable fashion or whether we haven't.
You might know Monday morning.
Yeah, we certainly will know Monday, but we
Right.
might know over the weekend.
Fred, can I add a couple of comments? Because I was in on the conference Zoom meeting that we had with the MUSC people. The driver's license protocol exists, so they'll know who's a resident of Kiowa versus out of state
Right.
town. Their point isn't so much to simply want to test Kiowa residents, other than they want a data set. They want a baseline data set of
Right.
Kiowa community. And they can get that whether some non-residents slide into the line or not, as long as the protocol with the driver's license is followed. I think the rest of this conversation is interesting, but I think before we panic and say that we've got not enough capacity, let's see how Monday unfolds. We can always add some capacity next week or the week after, but they do have a protocol in place that segregates residents and gives them the data set that they're trying to ascertain while still accommodating folks who are not full-time residents but happen to be here.
Well, Chris, I don't think, sorry, certainly for me, I wasn't panicking at all about not having enough availability. I suspect 3 days is going to be just fine. As a matter of fact, I'm not panicking at all, but I think that if the primary target are the residents of Kiowa, which is appropriate for the town of Kiowa Island, and we announce that the first 2 days are for residents in order to manage the crowds and to give the residents preference, then I think it is appropriate to do something to ensure that that actually happens. And I mean, I may be completely wrong here, but I'm less sanguine about this.
Well, I think if someone has stood in line for 30 or 40 minutes and they get up the line and you find out that they're not a full-time resident, but they have a home here and they're from Ohio, I think MUSC is going to take their blood.
I understand that. That's what Greg said. My question is, should we check driver's licenses before to ensure? I mean, look, we're going around in circles. As a minimum, I would suggest that we.
Klaus, I'm not minimizing your concern at all. I mean, it is a real concern. It's a real concern, and clearly where we would have a problem is if you had so many that sort of crowded out the residents. you know, we can see how we deal with that. But my concern is that if we were going to try to do that, we can try it with the communications over the weekend. We can do it with signage. But my problem is that that the people who are helping us out. I mean, we got our CERT team, which are residents on the island who have been really gracious to be the ones who are going to help sort of outside the building, help people know where to go and where to park, and deal with the first couple of questions. But I don't want to put those people in the position where they're having to physically deal, looking at drive, getting in that. Their whole issue is they're masked and they're trying to keep distance, and frankly, they're not going to be real comfortable doing this if I call them up and say, well, by the way, we also want you to start checking people's driver's license.
I understand.
Yeah.
Can I suggest as a compromise that as a minimum, in the final communication that goes out, say something along the following lines, phrased better, but something along the following lines. Testing will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, yada, yada, A to L. The testing on Monday and Tuesday is for full-time Kiowa residents with a Kiowa driver's license address only. Please do not come to the test center if you are not a full-time Kiowa resident. As a minimum, we should show that. We should say that.
We'll say that they need to be a full-time resident. Yeah. Okay. All right. Are we good for now?
I would just simply like to say, because I probably of the council members am more aware of the amount of time and effort has gone into this on yours and Stephanie's part. And I just think the community should know how much effort you and she have given to this. And I'd like to thank you and congratulate you for something that really 3-4 days ago didn't look like it was going to come to pass. So you've done yeoman's work to get this thing over the finish line. Congratulations.
We should also thank Roger Warren and the Kio Island Golf Resort too for anteing up the facility. It's a great facility. It's one that was built here and because of the situation we're in has not been able to be used. And it's beautiful and it was very gracious to offer this to the community.
That was very nice of them, and I agree with that. That was very kind of them.
All right. Anything else?
Nope, thank you.
All right.
No,
We're
thank
adjourned.
you.
We're adjourned.
Okay.
Bye.